Right. Let's say the pledge of allegiance. Well,
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right. Thing this is say call to order.
All right.
You too, Mr. Birch. You picked a good week to be in Arizona.
Oh,
It
yeah,
was a very nice week in Arizona.
70 degrees.
Alright. Alright. So determination of quorum, yes. Call for other business items? No. Approval of consent agenda. Meeting minutes
And business licenses.
and business licenses. You guys see anything special about the meeting minutes that you?
I read the minutes, I was okay, but I told myself I'd look at these business
Hmm.
licenses at the meeting.
And Carly didn't print me a packet. She was gonna come in. I told her just to stay home. So if you can run in some point next week and sign minutes
And send minutes?
and sign.
Sign them? Oh,
Yeah,
sure.
I'm out for the next 2 days, so
Okay.
I can always leave them on my desk though.
Okay. All you gotta do is sign something?
Yeah.
All right, let me do that.
I moved that we approve the consent agenda.
Do we have a second? All right. Meeting minutes have been approved?
Need to vote.
No, we do need to vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
There we go. Now, all right, business licenses, nothing looked out of the ordinary to me. You
No.
guys,
Look good.
Mr. Birch?
You just approved them.
Oh, I did?
Uh-huh.
Oh, okay.
Consent agenda includes the.
Okay. All right. Okay, so the next item I have is commission reports, which I believe is what I submitted for the short-term rental update.
Hmm.
Yes or no?
That's just a general.
Unfinished.
That's just a general item. If any of you have anything you want to say?
Okay,
Nothing intelligent.
nothing intelligent. And then, any comments from the public for public hearing?
Again,
Are we talking about the B&B, Airbnb?
Not yet.
Yeah, we're not there yet.
Okay,
I'm jumping the gun on that, man.
Keep up the great work.
New business, item A of blank. Oh. All right, unfinished business. Short-term rental update from Brian, from Rain.
Right.
So did everybody get a chance to? Yeah, it's okay. You know, that's such a common thing. It's such a common comment.
Just blame it on,
Call for rain.
blame it on me, Cindy. That's a me mistake right there.
Oh.
All gas, no brakes. That was all me. That was all me.
Were you able to read over my suggestions and everybody? Mr. Birch?
yes,
Yeah.
I had one comment. I was hoping that we would recommend to council a head tax or an occupancy tax, and I suggested maybe 10%.
You mean on top of the already heads and beds tax, which they would be obliged to?
Well, they would be paying the business license, the owner would, and the permit license. But the rentee would be paying sales tax and an occupancy tax, something the city has yet to adopt. Should we someday get a hotel or a motel here or get further expansion of the Airbnb situation?
County and state mandated? I mean, because we're already doing.
He's
taxes
talking about
In addition,
a cherry on top per se, I think.
okay.
And is that
Are you
right?
thinking about the motel lodging one? Yeah, no, that's different.
I think, Steve, you're mentioning this in terms of an additional heads and beds tax that goes directly to the city.
That would go to the city, yes,
Yeah, and it's a 10%.
right.
Well,
I think I've paid as high as almost 20% in some cities that I've traveled to. Todd, you might know better. You travel?
I do, but I don't usually pay that much attention to the fees. I just look at the price and look clearly, so.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I can go back and look through the receipts if you want some comparison, but I don't pay that much attention to what I'm paying for fees.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever actually seen as low as 10%, maybe once or twice, but I have seen several times anywhere from 14 to 16%. I thought maybe we'd start small and see if we need to adopt a larger one later, but we probably should have one at least.
So we're not out of line.
I can look
By
right
adding
here, I've got.
I don't think so. No, the fees and add-ons have gone up, especially post-COVID. And you can pass it all off on to the customer, so the owner's not really paying anything for it. I agree with Steve, 10%'s pretty low, and it wouldn't be too big of a cherry on top. I just kind of want to suggest again, as we're making these regulations up out of concerns rather than issues, that we just remain flexible on that. But I think that's a fine enough item to add to the list of what we already have going. And I don't know, as vague and arbitrary as I'm being with this, I don't even know what this means after we have this list. Do we just give it to council and say like these are the suggestions of what we're saying, even though we're not wanting it to be a hard-lined agreement to apply to our one B&B owner in town? Any thoughts on that?
Councilman Hayes? Do you have any?
Well, I'm not sure with the permit situation that the council is ever going to have to make a resolution to it, because it's just a permit for a business license. And obviously sales tax will be there, but I think at one point they are going to have to establish an occupancy tax for rentals units. And that may require an ordinance. Do you not agree, Todd?
Yes, so
And
any
then
of
those
these,
are my regular
any of
taxes,
these
that's on-
rules would
that's
be
my
adopted by
1,000.
ordinance,
That's for.
and would be part of
It's in
the
Washington.
Toledo City Code. It would
Right.
be a new section regulating B&Bs differently. So that, and it would have to go through public hearings and then because it's a new section of code, it would probably have to go Department of Commerce, have them take a look at it and go through the whole CEQA process and all of that.
No, I didn't get to hear last night's city council meeting. Did they address our recommendation whatsoever with regards to the Winlock refund policy for building permits?
No, primarily because Todd brought up a very good suggestion, and I started reading the Winlock refund policy a little more closely. And it's not the best policy.
Okay.
Policy, so I'm in the process of researching other jurisdictions, and I will be bringing that back to Planning Commission to basically bless again.
Okay.
That's where we are.
No, I think that there was a decision made to address ordinances on either a quarterly or a semi-annual basis. Is that right, Rachel?
Say that one more time?
Wasn't there some discussion with regards to setting ordinance making on a quarterly or a semi-annual basis because of the costs?
No, I think that was codes. We were gonna start looking at some of our codes, our city codes.
City codes are adopted by ordinance, so he's talking about the same thing.
Oh, okay.
So looking at code updates.
That was a while ago. We talked about that. Yeah, we talked about doing chunks of them.
Yeah, previously, we've just been doing them one at a time, which is expensive for the city when they want to do a small code update because it requires the same process as if you were to do them all together as one batch. Then there's an incremental cost of each, the code changes, but you only have to go through SEPA once, you only have one public notice,
Right.
you only have one hearing, you only have. So it's just more efficient if you can batch them together, if it's not an emergency that you need to get something changed. So this would likely be part of our next code update. We would kind of park it
Right.
until we got to that point, and then we bring all those back to planning commission.
Okay.
For public hearing
Right.
would be what I would suggest.
That's what I was getting at.
Okay.
I did have a question, it says that the regulations are suggested to be open to appeal entirely and are modified on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
So, I mean, that basically nullifies any of these rules. When you adopt laws or ordinances or new regulations, you're trying to address a situation that you have or a perceived situation that you're going to have. And to allow flexibility in how it's applied, it becomes very problematic for both city staff while we're reviewing it. Because if everything is decided on a case-by-case basis, then, you don't want to have any sort of discrepancy in how you process those from one individual to another. So you need to come up with, variance criteria that these can be varied if these things happen, or in the case of something, then you can vary it. So adding that language in here, I mean, you can always appeal.
Okay,
That's part of any permitting or action that the city does. You can always either, take it to court, if that's the appeal process, or you can take it to LUBA if it's a land use appeal, or you can, we go to council first before we go off, the city makes a land use decision.
Yeah.
But,
I understand that.
yeah, I guess I just like to vet that out a little bit before you make a recommendation to council that they adopt a regulation that says it can be modified.
That was essentially my question, is like, how would we recommend that if it's just really open? Really also feeling awkward about two things here. We're really addressing potential issues. And certain concerns that aren't really based from an issue. And I'm worried about it potentially impeding someone's decision in town to do a B&B if one of these things was set in stone. I understand what you're saying though, Todd, like why say anything basically is why say anything, and I guess the only reason why we are saying anything is because we're addressing a concern. I don't know, it's like, what do you guys feel about that? Like, coming in with like more hardline recommendations? Or like, just like, we know that we hear that there is concern about this, and this is what we've thought about these concerns, how we can react to these concerns. This kind of the open-ended is what I was hoping for.
Well, I think by leaving off the first paragraph, the opening paragraph, just calling these the rules. But maybe a little, just a little tweaking on the 5 points here. It seems like we'd be able to recommend council take a look at it.
I understand that would also put undue stress on staff. If an issue were to actually happen, then all of a sudden it's gonna land in your laps again. So is there a way that we could keep it open-ended, and so if the issue were to arise, it comes back to planning commission to come up with like a hardline decision about that?
Yeah, because we're creating a new rule set, then you can also create how it's administered.
Sure.
And you can establish you can make a recommendation, the council establish a process by which it would be unusual to have a planning commission review a code violation. I mean, these, as they get adopted, they would be regulations that would apply more like nuisance rules. They're not really land use controls, and usually planning commissions kind of stay focused on land use and long range city planning and those sorts of things. So it would be a little bit unusual, but there's nothing that says it's wrong. I mean, you are an established committee. I mean, the commission that's appointed by mayor and council. So, I mean, they can delegate whatever authority they want to the planning commission, and even though it's unusual, it doesn't mean it can't happen. But I guess, the other finding that you could make is if this is a perceived issue, you've been charged with looking at this. And if planning commission looks at this and decides we don't have an issue, so we don't really need rules right now, that could be your recommendation too.
Yeah.
There you go.
I mean.
That's a better way to put it. Thank you.
So that, I mean, that could be your recommendation. The council is, we've been asked to look at this. we've done our investigating and we've done our due diligence and we have these findings. And
Mhm.
there's only one in town. We've not had any of these issues with that one in town, or it's been few and far between. And
Yeah,
at this point in time, it's not an issue, so we would suggest not adopting new regulations. And then addressing, you know, if you have a huge influx of B&Bs that come in, like if next year that they open up 40 of them,
right.
then maybe you do want to think about regulating them and trying to get some consistency in how they're operated and maintained
Yeah,
and have some policies relating to that. But at this point, you don't really have an issue to address.
yes,
So maybe you could go that way, or you could, as Commissioner Hill had suggested, you could just take the first paragraph off, or you could forward it as is. I mean, the fact that you have that clause in there, I guess my fear is that if you put that in there and you do apply it on a case by case basis and it doesn't apply to everybody equally, then there's a possible discrimination issue in there. I mean,
that was just my naivete, putting that in there like that. I didn't think about it.
So we can just put this in our pocket. And
You know, I'm gonna recommend we don't do that, actually. I think I agree with Commissioner Hill that we could strike that first paragraph, but the council came to us because we brought it to them, saying that we anticipate that there will be more Airbnbs. Now that they can sit on it if they want to, but I think we ought to submit something to them. And I think your rules, other than the variability of the one thing, are pretty good rules. And if we add an occupancy tax, they get to look at that, and they can pigeonhole it if they want to, but then it remains unfinished business for us. And as Todd said, if then all of a sudden we get a half a dozen people next year that decide on their own to open B&Bs, we have no regulations for them until after the fact.
So now it's, in my head, it's leaning more towards just striking the first paragraph and submitting the 5 rules plus 1, your 10% occupancy tax to city. And suggesting that to council.
So
At
that
least
does,
it's off our table that way.
that does initiate a secret process, so that does turn Todd on for just this one item.
Only if it goes
We
to
just bring
council,
it to
right?
council and decide it, see if council has interest, and if council has interest, we can schedule it.
Yeah, well,
Right, but we need to stop, yeah, I mean, it's us getting more, as things are coming up, I do like the idea of limiting the ordinance changes, you know.
yeah, to batches, but I would agree with what you're saying, because planning commission has looked at this, they brought it up and council said, yes, please analyze it. This is a result of that analysis, and this itself doesn't trigger SEPA, it's the rulemaking that would follow. If council waves the magic wand and say, yes, these are adopted now as regulations, put them in our code, well, then you violated the process by not having a SEPA and not going through the public hearing process and accepting input on it and all that stuff. But at the point when planning commission is just saying, council's asked us to look at this, we've looked at it, and here's what we recommend. That's, in my mind, that's not an action, because you're not adopting regulations. You're just following through with a task item that you've been asked to look at. If you recommend code, you know, if we take this and we put it in city code and then we say, this is what planning commission recommends, that should probably go through the SEPA and commerce process before it goes to council. But just to forward on a recommendation, these are the types of things we think we should look at. And then we can initiate that with our next batch of code updates.
Yeah, I kind of agree that way, Todd. I think if we give it back to council, under the, as Brian had put it together, then council can do one of two things. Council can say, yes, we're considering it, we'll table it for now. Or they can say, we agree with this, it needs to be codified, go back to planning commission and write up an official code to present to us so that we can then start. Because that will give council the opportunity to say, yes, we feel strongly enough that this needs to happen, that were willing to start the SEPA process and then go into codification.
Yeah, and I mean, the only reason it would need to go through SEPA is because it would probably be part of the land use control that the city adopts. If you chose to adopt it instead as part of your nuisance regulations or business regulations, then that wouldn't be SEPA. Because it has no land use impact, so just depends on how council decides to move this forward.
So will, it would be required then to kind of repackage this and take that paragraph off, add your item and send, and to have something to go to council then?
Someone just needs
We
to make a motion to remove that first paragraph.
So
Oh,
actually,
okay.
I would suggest that this be in the form of either a staff report with the recommendation coming from
Mhm.
planning commission, and Rachel and I could probably tackle that
Mhm.
based on what Brian's already written.
Can I entertain a motion to strike the opening paragraph and to add the extra item for 10% heads and beds tax?
So moved.
Can I get a second? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, excellent. Well, that non-issue is off our shoulders. Moving on to other business. Thanks, Todd, by the way, that helped me out a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's not really good. Plan Growth Committee meeting recap. What is that?
that's me. So on behalf of the city, I attend Lewis County's Plan Growth Committee, which is basically their 2025 comprehensive plan update. All the cities in the county are represented at this meeting. And they're talking about the 2025 growth management plan, comprehensive plan update. So I do attend those, and they've been going on since about June now. And that we talk about a variety of different things. We officially started the 2025 comp plan update in June, although we still haven't received our grant funding for that yet. So the city would be writing empty checks because they don't have the backfill of the grant to pay the. So this is all Commerce awards the cities a bit of money to do that. So we applied for the grant, and we got notified that we had been awarded the grant, but they still haven't sent us the contract for the grant, and they're not sending it to any of the cities, we found out today, so. So I just wanted to give you all an update on that, and I'd be happy to address any broader questions about the comp plan update process. Today we talked about moving urban growth boundaries, so the cities the county had asked the city to identify if they could predict that they would be asking for an expansion of their urban growth boundary. We've used most of ours, and we've predicted a fairly large population growth, which both of those things support an urban growth boundary expansion. So today I represented Toledo to say that we would be looking at urban growth boundary expansions. And there are two areas that are identified by the county as urban reserve areas. So that's areas where the county's already thought, even though it's not the city's urban growth area, that's the likely area that the city would expand into in the future. And they did that in their last comp plan update. That's been on the books for a long time now. So as part of that, I just indicated that we'd likely consider those areas first and try to work our way out along 505 out to the interchange would be our target. And we have a lot of analysis to do to show how much land we need. We can only take what we need. They have state regulations. The whole growth management policy at the state level is regulated so that you don't have huge urbanized areas that have sprawl. You want to try to contain development as much as you can. There have also been some changes to housing policies so that communities now, most communities must not have single family residential land anymore. You have to allow at least 2 residences on every piece of property so that they have additional dwelling units that a lot of communities are using to accommodate that one rather than to require duplexes or allow duplexes on every piece of property, but some are doing that too. So So today we talked about that, and also we indicated that there may be some areas of our existing urban growth boundary that we might consider taking out in exchange for adding even more in. If there are areas within our urban growth area that we either can't use because they're overly constrained, or we don't think we'll ever convert because they're in a use that's fairly permanent and they don't want to come into the city, then we can pull them out of our UGA. So that was the discussion mainly today. We also, we talked a little bit about the critical areas updates. There's been a lot of critical areas code changes in the last 7 or 8 years since the last comp plan update was done. The county had said that the cities can adopt their critical areas ordinance by reference. So rather than come up with our own critical areas ordinance, the counties has to go through the process, as do we all. But the easy way out, rather than hire a team or have city resources and city staff research and figure out what the codes are and how to implement those, we can just basically reference the counties and say what they adopted is our code. We'll administer it, but we'll use their rules. And since they've got to go through the whole process, that cuts down a significant chunk of work that we have to do. The reason that communities don't always do that is because it just depends on how the county is aligned. If the county comes out with these huge buffers on creeks and streams that make large tracts of private property then undevelopable, then a lot of the communities who disagree with that approach might try to push the envelope and get smaller buffers or get additional mitigation measures to do that. So in order to do that, you would need to create your own.
And have those distances increased, their buffers from?
They will increase significantly because the state guidelines and the science and the best available sciences are changing. Right now, I think ecology is moving to the buffers based on the tallest potential tree height. So when you look at what tree species are in that area, if you have something that will grow to be 100 feet tall, then the buffer needs to be at least 100 feet. And then you also look at shading and tree growers and other things. So in some cases, it's as much as 300 feet from streams.
Wow.
Most of ours right now, by county code, are at 50.
Yeah, 51, 15.
50 to 100, it might be 150, but it's 50 is what applies to most of the streams that we have that I've looked at here in the county. So, so they will get bigger, and it's state law now that they must get bigger, but it doesn't say by how much. Some of the sciences that ecology is using are, it's pretty ridiculous.
Right.
I mean,
That's
you
a
find
huge increase.
you find the tree that's the nearest to the stream, and if the stream doesn't have any trees, then you go however far it takes, and then you protect that tree because that provides habitat that's connected to the stream. So there's lots of new theories that
I mean, it's gonna affect county a lot more than it's gonna affect us too, like in terms of scale and scope.
yeah, and Lewis County, from my observation, has pushed the envelope a lot on those things in the past. Whether or not they do this time or not depends on staff and county council, county commissioners. So, but that is an option that if that process seems to be going in a way that supports the minimum standards necessary to achieve compliance, then it may be a good recommendation to say, let's just adopt theirs, because that would save tens of thousands of dollars for the city. You know, it's probably 50 to 60 grand to create a critical areas ordinance.
Can we copy paste theirs? Can we reference theirs with exceptions?
You can steal it. Plagiarizing is actually something that's quite common when it comes to cities and codes. We do it all the time. I don't oftentimes go out and try to sit down and write new code from scratch. I find a jurisdiction that's done that before, and usually that's been successful in doing that for a number of years, that kind of has the same community alignment that the one I'm working in. You know, so if it's a preservationist type of community, then I'll look to other communities that have those types of codes. If it's one that is less of a preservationist community, more of a property rights community, then I'll look for codes that. So we can do that too. In the end, we can choose to just adopt theirs, but then we'd still have to go through the legwork because we're adopting our own. So it would save a lot on writing and creating. All we do is read it and modify it. But we still have to go through our own SEPA process then and other things, which, if we do that out of cycle from the big comp plan, it would just require another process. Not a big deal, but a deal.
And it would affect which urban growth area we'd like to go in, right? Like which direction we'd like to put that in, because if like, say, if there's like a bunch of potential buffer problems, we wouldn't necessarily want that to be our.
Yeah, cities don't usually want to have a bunch of, the idea with an urban growth area is that eventually you annex it and it comes into the city. And the reason you want property in the city is because it generates tax base in exchange for the services. If you're annexing a bunch of swampland or things that never gonna yield, but yet you're still required to police it and you're still required to govern it and all those other things, then you're taking in property that has little tax revenue, but
Right.
it still has some burden on the city, although if you have no development, it's not always a lot, but. So that was discussed. The other thing that we talked about is there appears to be a climate planning grant. That can be used for a lot of the requirements of GMA. So I'm gonna try to work with Rachel and we'll investigate whether or not we can apply for that and what the timelines are. But that could give us another $100K to help to offset the cost of the GMA planning, so that would be good. It's 67,000 a year for 2 years is what the city's awarded, and that doesn't cover the full cost of creating a comprehensive plan.
No.
So, so there's a lot of public process and a lot of comprehensive planning elements, so.
Is that the only grant that's applicable to pay for that?
Well, this other one, can be used for elements of that too.
Yeah, okay.
So, and that's another 50K a year for 2 years, so 100K. So that was a good takeaway from today's meeting. I didn't know about that climate action grant.
Sure.
But it's specifically there to cover the climate action planning and the climate resiliency planning and the other things that are part of the comp plan update. So that will help too.
I remember having this question when the new developments got approved and moved in, and that I was wondering when does that area stop being our UGA and start being the city? And then what is the process of deciding of where the next UGA comes? Do we all sit and look at a map and see where we choose to go forward, or is, like you said, from what you just said, it sounds like we have options to choose from rather than we choose which.
Well, so we have options. That's the easy road. I mean, if the county's already pre-designated that as the growth area and we choose to grow in that direction, then we can kind of lean on the analysis that they did. We don't have to do a bunch of analysis. We just have to do the analysis that demonstrates the need. If we look at that area and we think that's really not the best place for the city to grow, thank you, county, but we'd rather grow a little bit there and a little bit over here. That is up to the city to suggest. The counties are always responsible for setting the urban growth boundaries, though. So we're basically pitching the county that their analysis wasn't entirely supportive of city goals for these reasons, and they should change their mind.
Okay.
And we can do that in this process. That's why we do it. That's why we do the GMA planning with all the jurisdictions in the county at the same time. We're all going through it together in parallel. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the Board of County Commissioners will set your urban growth boundary.
So, and that's who we would liaise with, it would be the Board of County Commissioners to discuss these things, or would it be like Lee Napier?
It's through the process.
Okay.
So we'll do our analysis, we'll review that, and it will come before Planning Commission. We'll probably, the first thing that we have to do is put together a public participation plan that shows how we're going to engage the public and what we're going to do for the process. We've already roughly scoped the deliverable items for the GMA update and how we're going to spend the grant money. We had to do that in order to secure the grant. But when we kick off the process, after council blesses the public participation plan, then we'll begin. I'll do analysis with the support of others, and then we'll analyze and figure out, is this what it is, where we want to go, and then we'll come here to Planning Commission, and you all will look at the data that I've compiled and what you know from the local, and then based on that, we'll make a recommendation to council. And there's a lot of policies that change too about housing. There's economic development policies, there are environmental policies. All these policies will come before you all too. at stages throughout that 2-year process. So all of it comes here to planning commission. And then just like any other big project, you make a recommendation to council and then council acts on it. Once council blesses it, then they can adopt their own comprehensive plan. But then for the larger setting of the urban growth boundaries, all that stuff then falls on the counties to do. And the county has to have, all this has to be done by June of 2020.
Okay.
So, and then you had asked a question about annexation. We did just do an annexation. It's not yet completed.
Right.
But you reviewed that annexation and you made a recommendation to council and council adopted that annexation. So that brings land into the city. If it's in your UGA, you don't really have control over it. And you don't collect any tax dollars from it. You've just identified this is an area that we want to annex in the future.
Right.
And then as that area begins to grow or as people petition to annex, then it's easier because you already identified that as an area that you want to annex. You can't annex land that's outside of your UGA. You have to expand your UGA first and then you can annex the property. Once you annex it, then it's in the city. And as part of the city, all the city rules and regulations apply. And then
But we're not there yet.
it's not in the city.
Yeah.
They're stalled out because they didn't pay their bills.
Good reason to stop.
And I only feel comfortable saying that on public record because it's true and because it's been that way for months now and the county is stalled out because they haven't completed the process with the county.
Yeah.
Once the county completes their review of it at the BRB, once the applicant pays their fees, we'll resume the process, which then goes to the county for their boundary review board. And if they choose not to invoke jurisdiction, then it comes back to council for final action and then it's in the city.
Okay.
And there has been communication.
There
back
has
and
been
forth,
communication.
right, but that's, yeah,
Sure.
I wasn't, oh, you've been at CC in them, I
Yeah,
forgot.
but on some of them,
Yeah.
hopefully not all.
Todd,
Yes, sir.
I was wondering, at one point in time, we had made a recommendation to council to consider doing an ILA with the county with regards to our urban growth area.
Yep, I don't believe that's been presented to council yet, and right now, the other thing that needs to be resolved with them is the county is currently still, reviewing building permits for the city, although we're not routing them that way. So we need to terminate that relationship with the county or modify it, so those two things, and the one has to happen before the other.
Right.
County's aware because they haven't received any building permit applications from the city in a while that they're not, that something's not right. You know, so they're expecting to receive those. So, I don't know if you and, Councilor Hayes are still leading that effort or not, but we do need to have that needs to happen with the county and that's with Lee Napier that needs to be informed about what's going on. And then she can make a recommendation to her bosses and get it adopted by the county council.
It does bring up the question that if we got an agreement with the county on the UGA, would we not be able to move forward on a couple of these projects prior to annexation?
You can. The other thing that comes with it being in your UGA is you have the ability to designate zoning, pre-designate zoning in those areas. And the county, Lewis County, has been good in their comp plan process in recognizing that. And even with an interlocal agreement, the ILA, they have, it's a little bit unique. I haven't seen this in other counties, but they will actually let the cities review land development applications, everything except for floodplains. But you can review and permit stuff in your UGA with an interlocal agreement with Lewis County. I don't know why they do that, but they do. And it's a kind of a neat feature because it gives you more control over what happens in your UGA. So we still recommend that happen, but right now it's kind of a non-issue because all of the area to be within our UGA applied for annexation. And there's no real development happening outside of our city limits. So it's not really an issue for now. So it's probably not something that needs to be at the top of the list. But it should be on the list.
Well, my only thought is with regards to who's paying and who's not paying their bills. If there's specific individuals and we had an ILA, we could actually move forward with development on the other parcels, could we not?
It's in a weird limbo spot right now because the city's adopted the annexation, but the county boundary review board hasn't blessed it, and it's odd
Okay.
to be in limbo for this long. So I think at this point, to establish an interlocal agreement with the county, they probably look at that and say, well, why are we doing this? You've already annexed that property. Pay the fee and let us complete it. It's a couple $100. It's not.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So the county probably wouldn't be willing to enter into a discussion about an interlocal agreement for an area that's already been annexed by the city.
Or is in process.
But we could, we could have that conversation with them before we expand the urban growth area. It would just only apply to a handful of properties at that point, because most of it's been annexed.
But it might be useful, given that our urban reserve is probably the direction we're going. And the landowners are very pro-development. One of them more residential, one of them more light industry or.
Well, the other,
So I mean, there's things to be done, and so if annex, it could be helpful in the future.
so the downside to the county policy is that it sort of encourages development in your UGA. And that increases the need for services. It doesn't increase the city tax base at all. And you don't have policing authority out there, and even though the county may designate or delegate land use authority to you, they're the ones that receive the tax revenues from the development. So it's a little bit of a weird thing. It may be that you don't want an ILA. But instead you might suggest that you designate all that area as an urban holding zone. So you allow no development until such time as they're annexed.
Well, I think the other side of the coin on that, Todd, though, is like what Winlock did was that they wanted the revenue from building permits, utility hookups, and utility bills. And that was enough for them to want to go ahead and move forward with development.
Yeah, so that revenue is good, but you get into a point with property owners, if they've already developed their property as they wish in the UGA, then why would they want to get annexed and pay city taxes? Right, in our case, I think city taxes are actually still lower than county taxes, so it's kind of the opposite here too that way, but that may not always be the case. So usually the cities want that in there for the tax revenues. And to permit something in the county does inspire development to occur. And maybe what you do as a condition of development is you just condition them to not oppose annexation and have them record a covenant running with their property saying that they're good with annexation when it occurs. And then you can just roll in and take it all after it's all developed. There's lots of tools we can talk about for that.
It's good reason to not get addicted to the permitting money.
Yes, it is.
I think
It is.
I think that they needed that money coming in.
Is that, yeah, I don't know, I'm pretty addicted to permitting money.
It's about that controlled growth.
It feeds the kids and puts a roof over my head, so I like permitting.
When you said, they haven't paid their bills, is it, who is they, and is the bills just a $200 fee, you said?
Oh, no.
No,
So,
okay.
so the builds over time, so we do pass through billing for my charges. I bill the city then bills the applicants. In this case, there were numerous parties involved in that annexation, and all of them had an agreement with themselves to pay incremental amounts of the bills as they came, which worked fine for a while, but then it quit working fine. And they are mostly caught up now. I think it's, no?
45,
Oh, okay, that's not mostly caught up.
35, maybe 35.
Oh, okay, I thought it was down under 1,000 now, but.
And we prepaid all of those bills.
And yeah, we
Yeah,
paid them either
so,
to Todd or Green Osborne.
So my contract says I get paid every month, so the city's out the money until they pay up. And that's why the city basically instructed me and Gray and Osborne, stop work.
Sure.
We don't want to pay you guys to do anymore if they're not gonna reimburse us for this.
So it's the developers that haven't paid this 35.
I think it's specifically one of the parties, but I'm not sure with the.
Okay.
But it's an internal agreement that they have, and I think we've agreed to bill them separately. Is that what we're doing now, or are we just sending Windsor the bill still?
I'm still sending Windsor the bill. Yeah, there's been discussion about how do you want me to do this to make it convenient for everybody, but
To try to get.
I think they're still trying to figure out who's gonna pay what. I think someone's gonna come in and pay the portion of someone else, so I don't know.
Yeah.
I sent them a list again of everything that was outstanding. And then they did send a check for 2 invoices. Back in October, I think in the amount of like $8,000, but they didn't match any of our invoices or the amounts that we invoiced out. So I sent an email to Travis to ask him, you know, where is this being applied to, but I don't think it was a check sent by them. I can't remember now. And so I've cashed the check, but I just haven't really applied it to any invoice. So I kind of asked him about that too, and that's really the last I've heard, but that was this week, so there's activity happening.
We don't charge interest, do we?
No,
Oh, interesting.
Maybe we should.
So, so that was basically a summary of the meeting as it occurred today. It looks like in February, we're going to invite Commerce down to talk about funding and grants, especially if we're not all funded yet, because the clock is ticking. We have until June of 25 to complete this. And most of the smaller cities cannot afford to expend large amounts of cash with the promise of being reimbursed later from grants that aren't in place. You know, that just, there's a timing issue there, and the Commerce right now just isn't issuing any of the grants, and we don't know why. So we're going to invite them to our February meeting so we can talk about that. And then also talk about some of these alternate grants too, to see if there's a way we can get more money to apply to certain elements.
Okay.
Godspeed. Thanks for that report, Todd.
Sure.
Councilman Hayes, you have any public input? You got 3 minutes.
Oh. I like your idea, Steve, on the tax for, you know, for the B&Bs.
Yeah.
Because that, if those were to grow, it's gonna have an impact, it'll have an impact on leasing at a minimum, so that's good work.
I had one other item I wanted to bring up, Brian.
Yep.
I happened to have lunch with Councilman Rebecca Durst down here in Phoenix this week, and we were discussing past planning commission issues. And I guess prior to all of us, at one time when she was on the planning commission, they had been directed to investigate the zoning issues that we have in the city, since we have no zoning other than commercial and residential. And they had put a lot of time and effort into presenting something to city council that they thought was workable. And of course, the council at that time was still running, I would say, on the nothing's changing attitude that most of Toledo was. And so nothing ever came of it. But I know that we have discussed in the past, both council and planning commission, the need to update our zoning to designate areas that where we want commercial, where we don't want commercial, where we want retail, et cetera, et cetera. And I was wondering if we wanted to bring that to council's attention and see if they wanted to direct us back to resurrecting that issue and do some more homework on it, see if we can find out what the original planning commission had developed, see if we can adapt part of that, or whether it needed to be overhauled. But one way or the other, we are going to eventually have to deal with the zoning issue if we continue to grow. And what we have right now doesn't cut it.
Those will all be part of your comprehensive plan update. So you'll look at both zoning and comprehensive plan designations as part of the update. And the question about, do you have enough? Are they the right ones? Those are all issues that we'll have to work through as part of that update. And that's paid for by the grant. So that piece of it. I mean, you can certainly tackle whichever elements you'd like on your own. And if you can get closer to a draft of a zoning designation in code without the use of consultants or staff, then if planning commission takes that on and comes up with something, then certainly it's a lot easier to work through that process because we have a draft that's been formed and we can just present it. So the idea that work's been done
Yeah, so Steve, I'll reach out to Rebecca and find out what year that work was done, and we might be able to at least resurrect some meeting minutes.
Very good.
If I may, it would have been nice to have had that done because we've been seeing our retail space used as, you know, as a, what was it, candle shop, candle light industry, ultralight industry, and now we have our retail in the corner here being used as light industry office space instead of retail space.
Mhm.
So,
Having
which means we have light industry trucks all over the place, parked where our retail patrons would want to park. It's a mess right now, and we're stuck with it, but it would be nice if it would go away in the future as things change. So that would be fantastic to spend time on that.
Mhm.
Yeah, and the fact that you're spending time on it, brainstorming it is okay. At the point when you start holding meetings on it, though, I mean, you should probably notice the public that you're having meetings on your zoning and land use. I mean, you wouldn't want to have, I mean, certainly through the comp plan process, there'll be a lot of public notice and there'll be an established public process for that. If you're gonna have those meetings and be discussing them, making decisions about what's in the code, and we're not really gonna review that again, you should notice those meetings and make sure that it's advertised that you're looking at zoning code. But I agree, I think you're getting to the growth rate now where you should have more zones that are more specifically regulate uses.
Was that good, Mr. Birch, or shall we entertain a motion to present something to the council?
Well, if we're gonna make a motion, it's merely to indicate to council that we recognize the need for work on this issue and ask them to direct back to us to start working on it in an official capacity rather than Councilman Hayes saying, go forward in our meeting here. To make the paper trail correct.
All right. Do you want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to that effect.
Can you help the note taker out? please?
Did you hear that? Could you help Cindy out with what that motion is?
I make a motion that we request guidance from the council with regards to future zoning issues.
Thank you.
I get a second. All in favor?
Right.
Aye.
So moved. All right. I think that brings us to adjournment. If anybody else has anything else to say, no?
I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
All right.
That's it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Oh, my God.
Thank you, Brian, for taking care of that.
Yeah, man. It's a heavy weight, this gavel, I tell you what.
The crown, maybe it's the head that wears the crown.